The Seven Minds and the Seven Sublime Lords. We are about to begin our lecture tonight, and I ask everyone to pay the utmost attention. First of all, we must remember that there are 7 sublime lords and 7 truths, and this invites us to reflect. Certainly, there are 7 Dhyani Buddhas, 5, in truth, have acted up until this Aryan race, 2 will come in the 2 future races, the 6th for the 6th race and the 7th for the 7th race. The one that is here, within my insignificant person who is worth nothing, is the last of this race, the 5th. But we must make a clear distinction between what the Buddhas of contemplation are and what the earthly bodhisattvas are. Undoubtedly, the Buddhas of contemplation are the prototype of the earthly bodhisattva. The Buddhas of contemplation, in themselves, are father-mother, because every Buddha is dual. In every Buddha, there is a masculine principle, the father, and a feminine principle, the divine mother Kundalini Shakti. Some Orientalist authors think that an Upadaka, that is, the Buddha of contemplation, being, in himself, the father-mother, the glorious complement of any earthly bodhisattva, has no father-mother. Such a concept seems wrong to me because any Buddha of contemplation, any father-mother, glorious complement of the bodhisattva, has obviously emanated from the eternal common cosmic Father, this must be understood, and from the unmanifested Divine Mother, the unmanifested Prakriti. The eternal common cosmic Father is dual, he is the Father-Mother. From him emanates, in turn, the Buddha of contemplation, the particular Father-Mother of any Bodhisattva, and this must be understood. Thus, I do not think that an Upadaka, the Father-Mother, is an orphan. I think that the inner Father-Mother of each of us emanates from the eternal common cosmic Father-Mother, coessential with the absolute abstract space. Therefore, I allow myself to disagree with some authors about the term Anupadaka, or the Buddha of contemplation devoid of father and mother, as he is, in himself, the father and mother of a bodhisattva. Truly, Anupadaka is something more than all that. He is that Buddha of contemplation who has emanated from the eternal common cosmic Father. Each of us has our Father who is in secret, and each of us has our Divine Mother Kundalini, and the Bodhisattvas of the Buddhas of contemplation are no exception. We are the unfoldment of the Father-Mother and appear here among humanity to show the path, the way, to others. It is necessary that all this be understood. Obviously, the 7 of us are the prototypes for all the Buddhas of this planet Earth. This does not mean that the Buddhas themselves do not have their individual prototype, their father-mother. We only clarify that the 7, in themselves, constitute the prototype for any Buddha, and this must be understood. Thus, there are 7 sublime lords and 7 truths. Each truth is contained within each of the 7. If my deep inner God holds the truth about force, obviously, the one of Mercury, Raphael, will have the truth about science, about wisdom, and Saturn Oriphile about death, etc. So, there are 7 truths, that is obvious. But what I am saying is repeated in every human being. Much has been said about the mind, as if there were truly only one mind. There are, indeed, 7 minds. The first could be called the intellectual mind, or starting from the bottom, to better understand, we will say that the first is the instinctive mind, the second, the emotional mind, the third, the mental mind, the fourth, properly speaking, is the balanced mind, etc. All these 7 minds are extremely important. That the instinct has a mind is true, that the emotional center has a mind is certain, that the intellectual center has a mind too, who could deny it? That the motor center has a mind, no one can deny. There are 7 minds. One is amazed, for example, at the instinctive mind, how it governs organic processes so wonderfully. One is amazed at the sexual mind, how it governs the sexual activities of the human being. One is amazed at the motor mind, how it so wisely directs movements in the organism. One is amazed at the emotional mind and the intellectual mind. But do not forget that the 3 lower centers of the organic machine, that is, the sexual, instinctive, and motor centers, form a marvelous triangle, a splendid triangle that can perfectly manage the three forces, positive, negative, and neutral, of electricity. That truly astonishes. As for the purely emotional mind, it obviously gives us much to think about, for emotion also has a mind. And as for the intellectual mind, we all already know it. So, the instinctive, emotional, intellectual centers, the motor center, the sexual center, etc., have a mind. And there are two types of higher mind, which are the higher emotional mind and the higher mental mind. Unfortunately, that type of mind is inaccessible to human beings, unreachable, intangible. Whoever truly wants to come into contact with the higher emotional mind and the higher mental mind must bring the personality to a passive state, and whoever wants to live continuously in contact with the two higher centers, the emotional mind and the mental mind, must disintegrate not only the ego but also the personality. Much has been said about the centers of the machine, much has been said, perfectly, about the instinctive center, the emotional center, the mental center, the motor, and the sexual. Much has been said, indeed much has been spoken, but what has not been clearly explained is that each of those five centers has a mind, that the higher emotional mind and the higher mental mind are the two highest. So, each of those minds of the five centers of the organic machine, the intellectual, the emotional, the motor, the instinctive, and the sexual, has its own mind, and the higher emotional and higher mental centers each have their own mind. So, there are 7 minds, 7 spheres of action of the mind, there are 7 minds, and within each of them is contained a truth, the 7 contain the 7 truths. That is why the brothers must understand the relationship between the macrocosm and the microcosm. Once understood, one can move forward. These 7 minds totally control the organism, especially the 5, as I already mentioned. The 2 higher ones are, for now, inaccessible to human beings. But the 5 minds, intellect, emotion, motor center, instinctive center, and sexual center, control the organic machine completely. These 7 minds regulate all our activities. Unfortunately, we always have a bad secretary in the intellect, and this is, in reality, the ego, the self. The 3 brains of man are related to the 5 centers of the machine. Intellect, emotion, movement, instinct, and sex are related to the same machine. The intellectual center, the emotional center, and the motor center are worthy of attention. Obviously, the motor instinctive sexual center is a perfect triangle. The motor instinctive sexual center holds no antagonisms of any kind. That is why, in general, we speak of 3 brains, intellectual brain, emotional brain, and motor instinctive sexual center. As I said, we have a bad secretary, he is in charge of sending messages, sending representations, sending impressions to the wrong centers. He sends, for example, an impression to the instinctive center when it should not go to the instinctive but to the sexual center, or sends an impression meant for the intellectual center to the emotional center, or sends an impression meant for the emotional center to the motor instinctive sexual center. Thus, human beings live completely mistaken due to the ego, the self, the myself, the oneself, and that is the great problem. These 7 minds would function marvelously if it weren't for that terrible secretary we have within us, that ego, the self, the myself, the oneself, that is the grave issue. Up there, in the macrocosm, the 7 planetary spheres function in perfect harmony, everything works correctly. Unfortunately, down here, in the microcosm man, everything is mistaken, the 7 minds function more or less abnormally due to the ego, messages that are, for example, for the intellectual center arrive at the sexual, messages that are for the emotional center arrive at the motor. In conclusion, everyone lives in error, what is meant for the intellect reaches the sex, what is meant for sex reaches the intellect, what is meant for the emotional center reaches the instinctive center. Under these conditions, everyone is mistaken, the 7 minds function incorrectly due to the ego, due to the self, due to the myself. The same does not happen up there, in the macro cosm, the seven minds march wonderfully. Why? Because there everything operates in harmony, each of the seven planets has its own mind, and each of those minds operates in perfect concordance with the entire cosmos. That is what is interesting. Regarding the seven Buddhas, they are synthesized in Avalokitesvara. Who is Avalokitesvara? He is the synthesis of the seven, the logos, strictly the solar logos. Gautama Sakyamuni, for example, is the bodhisattva of the Buddha Amitabha or Amitabha, but Gautama is merely the earthly bodhisattva. What is important in Gautama is the Buddha of contemplation, that is fundamental. One who reaches the Buddhic state puts the seven minds in order. However, to reach the Buddhic state, it is necessary, first of all, to have gone through Buddhist annihilation, that is, to have disintegrated the ego, the I, the self. When one has gone through Buddhist annihilation, the seven minds operate in perfect harmony with the entire cosmos, and then man is perfect in the fullest sense of the word. But while the ego exists, the seven minds will be in disharmony, tumultuous, in a bad situation, managed by a terrible secretary, the ego, who, as I have said and am repeating, sends messages meant for one center to another center, creating chaos within ourselves, a chaos within our seven minds. We need, therefore, to accelerate the process of ego disintegration, and for this, the sacred fire, the Fahat, is necessary. Obviously, Fahat during manifestation is one, but Fahat, outside the three-dimensional world of Euclid, is different. During unmanifestation and in the cosmic nights, Fahat is transcendent sexual electricity. Undoubtedly, electricity is what, at the dawn of any creation, organizes atoms within molecules, organizes, creates, etc. There are those who think that electricity comes from an individual entity, from one of the many beings belonging to the army of the great word, but in reality, I say that electricity comes directly from the Ancient of Days, from the glory of Shekinah, from the Ancient of the Ages, from the Father who is in secret. Undoubtedly, it has, within itself, the power to organize atoms within molecules, the power to organize worlds, within it are the possibilities to perform any creation. For this reason, my dear brothers, I consider that electricity, in itself, is sacred, that we should look at electricity with deep respect, with great veneration. This about the seven minds also relates to the number 7. We know well that the cubic stone has 7 aspects and that the 7 cardinal points are in the cubic stone. The face that looks upward is the 5th cardinal point, and the one that looks downward is the 6th point, but in the center is the 7th. Thus, in the center of the cubic stone of Yesod, in the center of the philosophical cubic stone, the master has to measure himself, as he is crucified, measure himself in relation to the stone, understand his degree of inner self-realization. The adept who has reached the 7th degree, the qualified 7th initiation, obviously handles the 7 minds perfectly and receives, upon disintegrating the ego and the personality, the baptism of fire, and this is transcendental. That is why in the Apocalypse of St. John, when the 7th seal is reached, when the 7th seal is opened, it is said that, the kingdom of God has been consummated, as he promised to his servants, the prophets. There are 7 seals, 7 cups, this is something none of you could deny, and 7 trumpets. The Apocalypse of St. John, truly, is the book of wisdom, it is the book that is held, in his right hand, by Santiago, the great apostle, it is the book that guides the alchemists. Without the Apocalypse, the science of the great work could not be understood. We have to live the Apocalypse externally or internally. If we live it externally with all humanity, we will have to go through the abyss and the second death. The Bible indicates this. The Bible begins with the creation of man and ends with the judgment of man. Thus, the Apocalypse is transcendental. It speaks of the 7 angels. The Bible is sacred, especially in the Apocalypse, because the Apocalypse is a hermetic book. The initiate must break each of the 7 seals. The first seal belongs to the physical body. Thus, the initiate, upon breaking that seal, knows the mysteries of the abyss. The second seal corresponds to the organic vital fund, to the linga sharira of the Hindus, and upon breaking that seal, the initiate knows the science corresponding to the beheading of John the Baptist. Upon breaking the third seal, which belongs to the astral body, the initiate knows all the mysteries of the astral world. His sidereal vehicle becomes a vehicle of pure gold. Upon breaking the fourth seal, which corresponds to the mental world, the initiate, obviously, knows all the mysteries of the universal mind, knows what the seven minds are, has organized them correctly. His mind, in essence, has been crystallized. Upon breaking the fifth seal, which is the seal of the world of conscious will, the initiate obviously becomes the Son of Man. Upon breaking the sixth seal, which corresponds to the consciousness or intuitional buddhic body, the initiate knows the mysteries of the soul spirit, the mysteries of consciousness. And upon breaking the seventh seal, which belongs precisely to Shiva Tattva, the initiate then knows the mysteries of being. There are 7 seals to be broken, one by one. He who has broken the seventh seal receives the baptism of fire and is illuminated internally. That is what the brothers must understand. But many complain about the lack of illumination. They say to themselves, "But well, I have worked so much, studied so much, and suffered so much, and still, I don't receive illumination. Nothing, nothing. No. What's happening to me?" They protest because their chakras are not developing, they protest because they cannot travel astrally, they protest because they don't know how to travel in the mental body, they protest because they cannot visit the White Lodge at will, they protest because they are asleep, unconscious. But they do not realize that they have not organized their 7 minds, and they could not organize them while the ego exists within them. They have the ego very alive, fat, and robust, and yet they complain? How do those little brothers have the audacity to complain when they have the ego? While the ego exists, there is no right to have illumination. Where are they going to get it from? With consciousness bottled up between the ego, where are they going to get illumination? That is impossible. Dissolve the ego and you will have illumination, dissolve the ego and you will organize the 7 minds wonderfully. But while you do not dissolve it, the 7 minds of the 7 centers within you will be altered. Thus, in truth, one must work on oneself to be able to organize the 7 minds. Only he who has worked very hard on himself knows what it means to break the 7th seal and receive the baptism of fire. He who breaks the 7th seal and receives the baptism of fire comes into contact with the different parts of the deep inner self. Then comes illumination. One is amazed when they realize that the 12 apostles of Christ are within oneself. And so it is, they are. There are 12 cosmic powers within each human being, in their own deep inner self. When one knows how to make contact with those 12 inner powers, then one becomes illuminated, and no longer has any reason to protest. But while one is not in contact with those 12 powers, where will they get wisdom from? Where will they get illumination from? Where will they get power from? There are also 24 emanations, the 24 elders, which are 24 parts of our being. How could we know anything, really, about the zodiac, something other than mere mechanical astrology or fairground astrology, if one is not in direct contact with the 24 emanations? Within us, there are wonders. It has been said, and with complete clarity, that there are 3 types of relationships. First, the one with one's own body. If one does not know how to relate to their own body, one falls ill and dies. Second, the relationship with the external environment. If one does not know how to relate to their peers, conflicts and problems arise. But the third type of relationship is the most important, the relationship with each part of our own deep inner self. One could not relate to the 7, nor to the 12, nor to the 24, nor to the 4, etc., 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 if one has not eliminated their psychic aggregates. When one eliminates their psychic aggregates, the 7 minds are organized. When the 7 minds are organized, the 7 truths are known, and when the 7 truths are known, the 7 sublime lords, who are within each of us, are known. But if one has not eliminated the ego, one has not organized their 7 minds, nor will one be able to contact the 7 sublime lords, one will have to live in ignorance, in error. Thus, my dear brothers, understand the need to work better on yourselves. Understand that the intellectual center, the emotional center, the motor, the instinctive, the intellectual, and the sexual each have their own mind. Understand that the higher centers, higher emotional and higher mental, each have their own mind, that there are 7 minds, and that there are 7 truths, that there are 7 sublime lords within ourselves, here and now. Understand that what I say about man corresponds to the macro cosm, 7 truths, 7 sublime lords, and 7 minds relate to the 7 planets because the macro cosm and the microcosm correspond, as above, so below. Therefore, understand this correspondence between the macro cosm and the microcosm, and work on yourselves. Here, within me, is the 5th of the 7, which is the last of this race, but in the 6th race, at the end of the 6th race, the 6th will come, and much later, at the end of the 7th race, the 7th will come. Each of the 7 fulfills its work, its mission with the 7 races that must exist on planet Earth. So far there have been 5 races, the 6th is missing, and later the 7th. There are also 7 important chakras in the spine, and you are not ignorant of that. No one ignores what the 7 churches are, that is obvious. There are 7 musical notes, 7 arts, etc. The number 7 is the scale, but in the 7th scale, the Master receives the baptism of fire, Christ baptizes us with fire, John with water. In the scale of Jacob, we are baptized with water, and in the 7th level with fire. It is necessary for the brothers to understand all this, to seriously take the problem of the dissolution of the ego because, as the ego disintegrates, I repeat, the 7 minds are organized, they become perfect, and then the 7 truths and the 7 sublime lords within ourselves, here and now, are known. Well, brothers, now I give full freedom for you to ask whatever you have to ask, but do not forget that the questions must be within the topic and at the level of the 3rd chamber, as we are not in the ante-chamber, nor in the 1st or 2nd chamber. Student, that there are Buddhas of contemplation. I am deeply interested, Master, in how the Buddhas of contemplation differ from the Buddhas of compassion. I understand that there have been 32 Buddhas of compassion and that the last one reincarnated on planet Earth 34,000 years ago. And given what you say, it would be interesting to know how the Buddha of compassion differs from the Buddha of contemplation. Master, with pleasure. In any case, we must clarify the following: 7 are the Buddha prototypes, the synthesis is of Avalokitesvara, the Logos Buddha. Very well, and then comes a large number of Buddhas that must proceed according to the prototype of the 7, although this number each has its own ray or its own individual prototype, its own Buddha of contemplation. Within the term Buddha of contemplation, which is the father-mother of any bodhisattva, there are many virtues, facets, etc., because a Buddha of contemplation will be specialized in strength, another Buddha of contemplation may also be specialized in science, another in art, another in laws, etc., but that does not mean that because of this there are no Buddhas of compassion, Buddhas of wisdom, Buddhas of science. No, it is that the term Buddha of contemplation always relates to the divine prototype of any bodhisattva, to the glorious complement of any bodhisattva, whatever its nature may be. So the Buddhas of contemplation are unquestionably specialized, some in one field, others in others. That is how the Buddhist issue should be understood. Is there another question? Student, Venerable, what relationship or with which mind is the self-remembering and self-observation related? Master, well, obviously self-remembering is related to the higher mental center, just as self-observation is. However, I think, and I have always said, that the emotional center, especially referring to the higher emotional center, has more penetrability, more omniscience, more wisdom, and is more important. Remember that the whole Bible, from the creation of man to the judgment of man in the Apocalypse, is written with the higher emotional center, in the language of parables, and hence the wisdom contained in each verse. That's all. Any other brother can ask. Let's see, sister. Student, you spoke to us, master, about the 12 apostles. I would like you to explain which part of the body each one governs, as only some are known. At least I. Master, obviously, the 12 powers within each human being relate some to one organ, others to other organs, but in reality, they do not specifically relate to one organ or another, although they know the science of the organs within themselves. I say this because there are the 12 emanations within us, there are the 4 within us, there is the lion of the law within us, there is the particular Anubis, Minerva, etc. It is clear that the parts of the being, in reality, control all the different facets of the human organism, but not especially one controls one organ and another controls another organ, because that would make these entities mere mechanical creatures, and that is not the case. Thus, learning to relate to these 12 apostles within ourselves is extraordinary. Peter, for example, teaches us the mysteries of sex, Matthew teaches us pure science, Luke, his gospel is according to light, the solar gospel, Andrew teaches us the path of the disintegration of the ego in a very complete way, along with work in the fiery forge of Vulcan and the sacrifice for humanity. St. Andrew's cross is clearly speaking of all this. John is the Word, Thomas, what does Thomas tell us? He teaches us to handle the minds, and especially the intellectual mind. He tells us that we should not pay attention to external concepts, that we should depend strictly on our deep inner self and nothing else. It is clear that he says this to those who can already do this grace, to those who can depend on the different parts of their own being, and I think none of you can yet depend, by yourself, on your own being. Precisely, what is the work of a guru? A guru must put you in contact with the different parts of your own being, and also with the higher part of the being, which is that of the Ancient of Days. When a guru has fulfilled that mission, he withdraws, he no longer has any work to do with the student, but only from then on, from that moment, must the disciple learn to depend on the knowledge received from the different parts of his own being. What can we say about Peter? He is a specialist in the mysteries of sex. And what about Philip? Philip is a scribe, he also knows the states of jhanas and out-of-body travel, therein lies Philip's extraordinariness, etc., 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 because it would be long to enumerate all these parts. But, in any case, the 12 powers or 12 fundamental parts of our own being are the true 12 apostles. It is necessary to stop thinking a little about the historical 12 apostles and learn to think directly about the 12 apostles we carry within ourselves. That is fundamental. It is necessary to forget a little about the historical Christ and learn to think about the inner Christ. It is necessary to understand that the Divine Mother Kundalini is not only a woman from about 2000 years ago but that each one carries her within. It is necessary to be a bit more individual. Let's see. Student, Venerable Master, you mention the Jacob's ladder, in which, on the 4th rung, we receive the baptism of water, and it seems that on the 7th is the baptism of fire. Master, no, the baptism of water is received exactly on the 2nd rung, the baptism of fire on the 7th rung. Student, so, the question is this, in revolutionary psychology, a wonderful ladder is cited where each of us is. It certainly refers to the level of being of each person, but yesterday there was a doubt about whether the Jacob's ladder relates to the one you mention in this book. Master, well, properly, Jacob's ladder relates more to the purely initiatic issue, to the 7 fundamental rung. And regarding the levels of being, that is different, it relates to the vertical, and there are many levels of being until reaching the summit. Student, is there any coordination, Venerable, between the 7 minds and the law of octaves that governs the whole universe? Master, in the 7 minds, undoubtedly, each has its octaves, each mind has its 7 octaves. Obviously, because it is a law of the universe. If the number 3 has the power to create, the number 7 has the power to organize. The number 3 could create any universe, but it could not organize it. The 7 is needed for organization. Student, Venerable Master, the 7 minds are also summarized in 1, right? Master, the 7 minds have their synthesis in the mental body. But one thing is to have the mental body and another thing is to have the 7 modifications, the 7 minds. Obviously, these 7 modifications or 7 minds are related to the 7 centers, I repeat, intellectual, emotional, motor, instinctive, and sexual, and finally the higher emotional and higher mental. Student, Master, have the 7 logoi reincarnated on planet Earth? My question is this: can they reincarnate always, say on Venus, the same 7, on Mars the same 7, on Jupiter the same 7? Master, I will tell you, of the 7, I have said, 5 have reincarnated in the 5 races, the 6th will reincarnate in the future 6th race, the 7th in the 7th. But, obviously, when the cosmic night arrives, those physical bodies, which are the planets, will disintegrate into chaos. In a future Mahamanvantara, all the 7 will enter into new activity. But distinguish between what are the 7 Buddhas of contemplation and what are the 7 Bodhisattvas, the 7 unfoldings of the Buddhas of contemplation. The 7 Bodhisattvas are 7 human beings who appear in the world, work in the world, do a work in the world, and then leave. It is clear that the 7, in a future Mahamanvantara, will have a glorious activity, they will enter into activity, but in a higher order and in a new universe. Student, Venerable, could it be said that the 7 planets of the solar system are related to each of the 7 centers or minds of which you were speaking? Master, well, properly yes, in a certain sense yes, but the correspondence is not perfect, because the 7 minds are not perfect. There are the 24 elders within each human being, 24 parts of the being, ineffable. The being, in itself, cannot be schematized or diagrammed, it cannot be made into a diagram, it is like an army of innocent children. That is the being and it must be understood. Entering into contact with the 24 emanations is not so easy. Anyone who wants to have good relations with all the parts of their being, whether with the 24, the 12, or the 7, etc., must first have disintegrated the ego, because the ego is not admitted in the higher regions of the being. Distinguish, then, my dear brothers, between the being which we could properly call Atman, Atman in the full Sanskrit sense, or Atmatattva, and Chit. One thing is the being and another thing is Chit, consciousness. The being is Sat, consciousness is Chit, and the bliss of both is Ananda. Achieving bliss, the state of Ananda, is the supreme aspiration. But one could not reach that supreme bliss without going through the baptism of fire, and one could not go through the baptism without disintegrating the inhuman psychic aggregates, the living personification of our psychological defects. If there are any other questions, you may ask. Student, Master, you say that one must also disintegrate the personality. My question refers to this, as among the different psychologists who have given the concept of personality, most do not agree. Could you give us an esoteric concept of what personality is? Master, personality, in reality, is something that must be created. Every human being, when they come into the world, does not have personality, it is created during the 7 years of childhood and is strengthened over time and experiences. In personality are all the possibilities of error, acquired habits, false education received, violent passions. One who has dissolved the ego, the I, still has personality, and in personality is the possibility of error. In the Apocalypse, 2 beasts are mentioned, the first is the ego, the second is the personality. For both, it is the burning fire, with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Thus, distinguish between what is the beast, which is the ego, and the other, the false prophet who performs signs before the beast, i.e., the personality. He who has dissolved the ego must dissolve the personality. And when the personality has disintegrated atomically, then the baptism of fire occurs. Understood? Since then, deep inner illumination and true happiness, the authentic one, reign within us, the three important parts come into one: Sat, the being; Chit, the awakened, illuminated consciousness; and Ananda, the supreme happiness. Do you have any questions, brother? Student: I would like to. I understand that on one occasion you told us that the accumulation of psychic aggregates that form our, from the 1st to 7 years of our age, is neither nor has ever been the personality, that we acquire the personality when we attain enlightenment. That's how I remember it. Master, perhaps you are mistaken, brother, in your recollection, because any esotericist knows very well that one is not born with personality, one must create it, and one creates it during the first 7 years of childhood and strengthens it with time and experiences. There is no tomorrow for the personality of the dead. When one dies, 3 things go to the pantheon: the physical body, the vital body, and the ex-personality, which must be disintegrated. Thus, he who has killed the ego, who has disintegrated it, who has died within himself, must follow the normal process of every initiate: disintegrate the personality. It is not difficult to disintegrate it, it disintegrates in less than a year. But the ego is difficult. It takes 30 years to disintegrate it, and it has 10,000 aggregates. If one does not work judiciously for 30 years, the destruction of the ego will not be achieved. But if one works with true intensity, one achieves passing through the Buddhist annihilation. And once one has passed through the Buddhist annihilation, one must annihilate the personality. And once the personality has been annihilated, one reaches the 7th step of the master. Then, as a result, sequence, or corollary, one receives the baptism of fire, which brings illumination. So those who want illumination sooner are completely mistaken. Nothing is achieved overnight. This requires something more than 30 years of work. Of course, I am telling a truth, and it is harsh, but one must understand that what is very valuable, costs a lot. Any other questions? Student: Master, when the apostles awaited the coming of the fire of the Holy Spirit, was that roar at that moment when they had annihilated the personality? Master: the baptism of fire. It is a teaching about the baptism of fire. But let's not think about historical matters, think about what you are doing now. Are you destroying the ego? Student: yes, Master. Master, when you reach the 7th level, you will receive the baptism of fire, not before, and that's what counts. The true Pentecost is for the baptism of fire, understood? We must be less historians and more realists in this esoteric Christic matter, because everything written in the 4 Gospels, everything written in the Apocalypse, all of that is symbolic and should not be taken literally. Any other questions? Student: Master, is the creation of the solar bodies done after the ego has completely died? Master: well, what do you understand by solar bodies? Let's see. Student: I understand, according to the studies, the different solar bodies that are created in the 9th sphere, sex, using mercury, salt, sulfur, and in correspondence with the 7 Buddhas, with the law of 7. This is how the physical solar body, solar mental body, astral solar body, and so on are created. Master: true, but first one must create the higher existential bodies of the being and then Christify them. Only when they are already Christified do they receive the name solar, not before. Understood? What were you saying about that? Student: whether the solar bodies are created after the ego has died, or if they are created before the ego dies. Master: I already said that first one must create the bodies. Once the bodies are created, we have to convert them into pure gold vehicles, so that they can be covered by the different parts of the being. But one could not convert the higher existential bodies of the being into pure gold vehicles if one has not eliminated the dry mercury, and the dry mercury is constituted by the inhuman psychic aggregates that we carry inside. We need to eliminate the dry mercury and the arsenic sulfur. The arsenic sulfur or poisonous sulfur is the animal and beastly fire that must be eliminated. And as for the dry mercury, there is no doubt that it is the psychic aggregates. If those two factors, the dry mercury and the arsenic sulfur, are eliminated, then antimony can fix the spirit of gold in the bodies. But that spirit of gold is in the sacred semen. Only by transmuting and eliminating, as I said, the psychic aggregates, can antimony fix gold in the bodies. Only then do the existential bodies of the being become pure gold vehicles. And what were you saying about those vehicles? Student, whether they are created after the ego has died. Master, I already told you that they are created before the ego dies, but it is necessary for the ego to die for those bodies to become pure gold vehicles. Someone could create those bodies without having dissolved the ego, and if they do not dissolve it, they become Hanasmussen with double center of gravity. For the Hanasmussen, it is the abyss and the second death, as they are failures, abortions of the cosmic mother, and that's all. Let's see, brothers. Well, I think all the questions have been asked. Inferential peace.